A wonderful, loving, growing, passionate, exciting, creative relationship is one of the greatest virtues of life, and we should all be so fortunate blessed to have one of those in our lives. Some people have several. Some people have none. The danger is that if we have a bad relationship, we suddenly start to prejudge other ones or become reluctant for another relationship because of the experiences of the previous one, and I do not believe that is fair. Because think of all the wonderful human beings you can spend quality time with, share the best of your nature with, grow with, if you trust in your intuition and your judgments about whether or not someone should or should not, or you should be in their lives. Too many people are walking backwards through life because of the pain that they have felt, being victimized by circumstances that they were unprepared for. And that's all double negative. Because when you feel like a victim, you're going to be depressed and apathetic. When you're feeling like an apathetic victim and you're depressed, you really turn on the pro-inflammatory cytokines and free radicals, and therefore, whatever your chronological age, you're a lot older biologically. Lots older. That's why stress kills. Anyhow, that's just a little extemporaneous discussion off the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. And why when you eat meat, or you eat that tuna, it's got mercury, it's got lead, it is denatured protein, it's not vital, doesn't have vitalism, it's hurting us. And therefore, find something you could eat that you could enjoy, that's healthy and vital and alive. And finally, in another study from the Indian Council of Medical Research, that would be equivalent to our like National Academy of Sciences, they find that antioxidant therapy with polyphenols can reverse endothelial dysfunction. And that means that and this was published in the British Journal of Nutrition, that means that when you're taking in polyphenols, what do I mean? I mean the nutrients in blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, tart montmorency cherries, elderberries, acai berries, goji berries, loganberries, all these wonderful berries, they're rich in polyphenols, and that helps with the endothelium, which is the thin inner lining of cells and blood vessels that acts as a interface between the circulatory blood and the vessel wall, making it a critical mediator within the vascular system. And the endothelial dysfunction, meaning you're not eating right, and you have little rips and tears and cuts and abrasions and lesions. And that's common in diabetics, pre-diabetics, and people with heart disease. So, one of the most important indicators of how long you're going to live is how healthy your endothelium is. And pomegranate is one of the best things in the world for your endothelium. And I have helped people. In fact, this is interesting. I don't know if, Jesse, if you're listening in the studio right now, there was a young woman who was from Tennessee. She has a strong Tennessee accent. She was severely diabetic, on multiple medications, morbidly obese, lots of pain, and I think she was there 1 week, maybe 2, and this would have gone back 6 months ago. And just by flooding her body with a special protocol I put together, we dropped 103 points off her blood sugar in 1 week with no medications. And on the last day, when I said who would like to go for a walk, and I just said a walk, that's it. And we had a whole team of doctors and nurses and everyone out there. It's just a short walk out and back. We can see almost the whole distance. But I said, if any of you get tired, don't worry, we'll have a golf cart there and we'll just pick you up. Okay. So they didn't know if they were going to go a half a mile. She could probably have gone maybe when she came 100 feet. That's it. And she just kept going and going. So all the guests came down and we set up a table. And we had all the juices, and I said, put together a special juice, coconut water and watermelon juice, and then green juices. And Elaine Ryan, our our massage therapist came down, set up a table in case anybody got any sore legs or cramps. And everybody started cheering. Here's what was funny. They thought they were going to be there for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. They were there for 5 hours. Every single one of those people finished a marathon, including that woman. It shocked her. And she said she'd never felt that good. And she stayed on her protocol and lost a tremendous amount of weight, is doing great. She's probably listening right now. And I gave them all my own national championship medals. And one of the people said, "Why are you giving us a national championship medal?" I said, "Because what you did today took more effort than what I, as a trained athlete, did to win the national gold. So anytime you don't believe you can do something, put that above, your bedroom mirror on the wall and remind yourself you did that." Ask anyone training for a marathon, could they just go out without any training whatsoever? They'd never done a mile and do 26 miles. One guy, Ron, did 30 miles. No, it's not possible. But it was for these people. If Jesse has that, he'll let me know in a moment, and we'll play it. Otherwise, we're going to take a break now that I've given you a whole lot on this whole idea of inflammation. I want you to have the larger view. Because if you have the larger view, then you see why it's so important to select people in your life that are anti-inflammatory, meaning they're fun to be with, they're not a hassle, they're not judging you every other second, they're not acting like a perfectionist to which you are somehow incapable of understanding how to do things right, and always complaining and these little sniping comments that are so irritating. It's no different than eating junk food. It's like having a choice. Oh, here comes Bob or here comes Barbara. They're going to talk to me about what's wrong in my life. Why don't I just go over to that little pigsty and put some garbage in there and get down and eat like a pig? Because the outcome on my body, my cells, my self-esteem are going to be about the same. That's a visualization, isn't it? Okay. Jesse just says, "I've not found it yet, but I'll keep searching." Good. And also, when it comes to berries, you just can't do enough. I don't tell people how much of anything I do each day. Once someone was standing at a juice bar down in the village, and I just had a juice made, and I said, "Please wash in front of me the wheatgrass." But it's just come out of a bag. I said, "Yeah," and I don't know whose hands it touched. I don't know if they were cleaning up when it went in the bag. So the guy seemed a little irritated, but that's all right. He washed the wheatgrass, and he just kept, I said, "No, I don't want 2 ounces. Keep going." I drank 16 ounces. The guy standing beside me says, "I'll do one of those." I said, "I don't. I wouldn't. You got to build up to it." No, you do it, I can do it. I wouldn't suggest it, so I said, "Don't give him 16. Give him half that, 8 ounces. He got 3 drinks and it just projectile vomited right across the room. So I don't tell people what I eat, but if anyone's ever seen me eat, I eat very little. I'm a small eater. For a big guy, and it's only 2% body fat, so it's not fat. It's knowing what to eat that supplies your body with what it needs, and we're eating a lot of calories that don't help us at ages. Caloric restriction's the one thing you can do to lengthen your lifespan. Every single analysis, every meta-analysis have proven that. By the way, when it comes to meta-analysis, let me explain a little more deeply, because some people listening clearly were not listening to what I was saying. A meta, M-E-T-A, analysis means it's a quantitative, more often than not, epidemiological study. And they're looking for confirmatory conclusions, meaning there were 5 people in 5 different parts of the world who did studies on taking vitamin C, and it was able to reduce the common cold from 60 to 80%, or the duration of a cold by 30 to 40%. That means that they're looking for multiple studies to observe and look at the outcomes and see if they can develop a more precise estimate of the treatment, its benefits, its risks. If they're looking at a meta-analysis of fruits and vegetables, what kind of fruits and vegetables, how many servings you have to eat. But it's never just one, because one doesn't give you confirmatory conclusions. You have to have many. So when I'm talking about many, That doesn't mean literally meta is many. What it literally means is you're looking for quantitative epidemiological markers that show you conclusions you can reasonably draw based upon multiple studies being done. I have a lot of anal people in this audience, unfortunately. I can promise you they don't have a lot of fiber. It wouldn't be a lot of fun to be around. Yes, we would, Gary. We'd judge you to death. Good luck with that. Back in a moment with some real people giving us some of their issues. I haven't heard them. We will hear them together in just a moment on our talkback line.
My name is Stephanie. I'm in New York City, and I am calling to notify the troops that the Assembly Health Committee is bringing on A2371 for a vote this Tuesday. We need everyone in Albany that can get to Albany. This is a critical time. Autism Action Network has a plan listed available, and I would love to connect regarding the removal of a first freedom, the freedom of religion, a removal of a civil right, segregating children who are not vaccinated out of classrooms, and denying them their education. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Also, how can we get the IOM to demand that the science becomes done on the childhood schedule of vaccinations of primary importance to me. Thank you, Gary, for all you do. Really, I love
you. Okay, good. I'm hopeful people in this audience will be there. I'm sorry I'm out on the road. I can't be there. But if I was in New York, I can promise you I would be there, as I have been for hundreds of demonstrations with this audience. And so please get up to Albany, be there. And to the second part, anyone who represents a group that's going to be there, please contact Jay Greger, my art director in my office in New York, at 646-926-5442. If you're from a legitimate group, we will make copies of Deadly Deception. That's the last of the 4 documentaries I've done on vaccines, and that will help. Also, we will prepare an article that's already done on the mandated vaccines like Gardasil and the MMR. We have articles on both showing you the lack of science and efficacy and how dangerous they are, and there's no good science supporting that they're going to help people, and a lot they can hurt people. So if you take the articles and the documentaries and you give them to the demonstrations, but more importantly, give them to the legislators, we believe that that will help. Okay? We'll take another call.
Hello. There's been a fire recently in the Kearny area of New Jersey. There was a chemical plant fire where it released chlorine into the sky. I don't know how the whole basis of this other science, but is there any concerns for the surrounding areas that we should be aware of?
Okay, I need more information. How far are you located from the accident? If you contact the state environmental group will tell you which chemicals were released, not just chlorine, and is it continuing to release. If you have one burst out of a containment vessel, it depends upon the chemicals and their volatility. Some of those chlorine compounds can last for seconds, moments, hours, and other chemicals can last indefinitely. They're what we call forever chemicals. And then I would not trust the state. I would get myself an indoor, very high quality air filter and keep it on. So at least you know that you're not having a problem inside your immediate vicinity. But again, I don't know how far you are from this. I need more information. If you could give me more information, I could give you more details. But I would get as much information as possible, so at least you know if it's something to be very concerned about or something that is being taken care of. I'm going to come back in a little bit. We have another guest coming up in the last part of our program, and that guest is Deborah Kopade, and she is an environmental consultant to physicians and attorneys on environmental-related illnesses, and she's developed and overseen for passage of legislation initiatives to protect the public from our cell tower radiation and wireless technologies. And she and I are going to talk about the dangers right now in our legislation, both state and federal, of special interest passing 5G without showing the real dangers of this. All right. And Deborah holds degrees from Harvard University and MIT Sloan School of Management. So we look forward to her in a little bit. I'm very concerned. I know many in this audience are concerned. I also know others don't seem to care. We should care about what kind of data the government and special corporations, major corporations like Google and Facebook and Wikipedia, are collecting. There is a statement by Professor Yuval Noah Harari. Here's what he says. I want to thank John Whitehead for providing this quote. As more and more data flows from your body and brain to the smart machines via the biometric sensors, it will become easy for corporations, government, to know you, manipulate you, and make decisions on your behalf. Even more importantly, they could decipher the deep mechanisms of all bodies and brains, and therefore gain the power to engineer life. If we want to prevent a small elite from monopolizing such godlike powers, and if we want to prevent humankind from splitting into biological castes, the key question is, who owns the data? Does the data about your DNA, your brain, and your life belong to you, to the government, to a corporation, or to a human collective? End quote. Well, that says a lot. Yesterday I posted an article about how Google is now, or has, completed research on how to put a chip into a youngster in the brain that can then answer all the questions that that child would have. It's here now. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the government and the corporations wanting your DNA. So I'm suggesting that we prepare ourselves. How's this happening? It can only happen because Congress, which adopted legislation allowing police to collect and test DNA immediately following arrest, and the president, who signed the Rapid DNA Act into law, the courts, which have ruled that police can routinely take DNA samples from people who are arrested but not yet convicted of a crime, and local police agencies are all embarking on a diabolical campaign to create a nation of suspects predicated on a massive national DNA database. Here's what the New York Times says on this. And again, I want to thank John Whitehead for this. Quote, the science fiction future in which police can swiftly identify robbers and murderers from discarded soda cans and cigarette butts has arrived. In 2017, President Trump signed into law the Rapid DNA Act, which starting this year will enable approved police booking stations in several states to connect their rapid DNA machines to CODIS, that's C-O-D-I-S, the National DNA Database. Genetic fingerprinting is set to become as routine as old-fashioned kind. Have you seen all the new ads where you've got privacy because your iris and your fingerprint are the only thing that will open up your cell phone? Who do you think is going to now have your iris and your fingerprint? Every dystopian sci-fi film we've ever seen is suddenly converging into this present moment in a dangerous trifecta between science, technology, and a government that wants to be all-seeing, all-knowing, and all-powerful. By tapping into your phone lines and cell phone communications, the government knows what you say. By uploading all of your emails, opening your mail, and reading your Facebook posts and text messages, the government knows what you write. By monitoring your movements with the use of license plate readers, surveillance cameras, and other tracking devices, the government knows where you go, how long you stay, and when you return. By churning through all the data of your life, what you read, where you go, what you say, the government can predict what you will do. By mapping the synapses in your brain, scientists in turn and the government will know what you remember, and they will have access to all your memories. And by accessing your DNA, the government will soon know everything else about you that they don't already know. Your family chart, your ancestry, what you look like, your health history, your inclination to follow orders or chart your own course, etc. And of course, none of these technologies are foolproof, nor are they immune from tampering, hacking, or user bias. Nevertheless, they have become a convenient tool in the hands of government agents to render null and void the Constitution's requirements of privacy and its prohibitions against unreasonable searches and seizures. Consequently, no longer are we innocent until proven guilty. In the face of DNA evidence that places at the scene of a crime, behavior sensing technology that interprets your body temperature and facial tics as suspicious, and government surveillance devices that cross-check our biometrics, license plates, and DNA against a growing database of unsolved crimes and potential criminals. The government's questionable acquisition and use of DNA to identify individuals and supposedly solve crimes has come under particular scrutiny in recent years. And until recently, the government was required to at least observe some basic restrictions on when and where and how it could access someone's DNA. That has all been turned on its head by various U.S. Supreme Court rulings that paved the way for suspicious searches and herald the loss of privacy on a cellular level. Certainly, it was difficult enough trying to protect our privacy in the wake of the 2013 Supreme Court ruling of Maryland versus King that likened DNA collection to photographing and fingerprinting suspects when they are booked, thereby allowing the government to take DNA samples from people merely arrested in connection with crimes. Justice Scalia's dissent in Maryland versus King is worth reading, not only for the history lesson on the Fourth Amendment, but for its clear-sighted rebuke of the police state's tendency to justify every encroachment freedoms as necessary for security. Quote, solving unsolved crimes is a noble objective, but it occupies a lower place in the American pantheon of noble objectives than the protection of our people from suspicious law enforcement searches. Make no mistake about it. As an entirely predictable consequence of today's decision, your DNA can be taken and entered into a national DNA database if you're ever arrested, rightly or wrongly, and for whatever reason. Today's judgments will, to be sure, have the beneficial effect of solving more crimes. Then again, so would taking the DNA sample from anyone who flies on an airplane. Okay? And also applies for a driver's license or attends a public school. Perhaps the construction of such a genetic center is wise, but I doubt that the proud men who wrote the Charter of Our Liberties would have been so eager to open their mouths for royal inspection, end quote. Something for us to think about. The court's decision to let stand the Maryland Court of Appeals ruling in Raynor versus Maryland, which essentially determined that individuals who do not have a right to privacy when it comes to their DNA, made Americans even more vulnerable to the government's accessing and analyzing and storing their DNA without their knowledge or permission. Although Glenn Raynor, a suspect rapist, willingly agreed to be questioned by police, he refused to provide them with the DNA sample. No problem, police simply swabbed the chair in which he had been sitting and took what he refused to voluntarily provide. Raynor's DNA was a match and the suspect became a convict. As the dissenting opinion in Raynor for Maryland Court of Appeals rightly warned, quote, a person desiring to keep her DNA profile private must conduct her public affairs in a hermetically sealed hazmat suit. The majority's holdings means that a person can no longer vote, participate in a jury, or obtain a driver's license without opening up his genetic material for state collection and codification, end quote. And Ed, in refusing to hear the case, U.S. Supreme Court gave its tacit approval for government agents to collect DNA, likening to a person's fingerprints or the color of their hair, eyes, and skin. Whereas fingerprint technology created a watershed moment for police in their ability to crack a case, DNA technology is now being held by law enforcement agencies as the magic bullet in crime solving. It's what police like to refer to as modern fingerprint. However, unlike a fingerprint, the DNA print reveals everything about who you are, where you come from, and who you'll be. And with such a powerful tool at their disposal, it was inevitable that the government's collection of DNA would become a slippery slope towards government intrusion. All 50 states now maintain their own DNA databases, although the protocols for collection differ from state to state. Increasingly, many of the data from local data banks are being uploaded to CODIS, that's the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's massive DNA database, which has become a de facto way to identify and crack the American people from birth to death. They're tracking everything. Even hospitals have gotten into the game by taking and storing newborn babies' DNA, often without their parents' knowledge or consent, as part of the government's mandatory genetic screening of newborns. However, in many states, the DNA is stored indefinitely. What this means for those being born today is inclusion in a government database that contains intimate information about who they are, their ancestry, and what awaits them in the future, including their inclinations to be followers, leaders, or troublemakers. And for the rest of us, it's just a matter of time before the government gets hold of your DNA, either through mandatory programs carried out in connection with law enforcement and corporate America, by warrantless accessing our family DNA shared with genealogical services such as Ancestry and 23andMe, or through the collection of our shed or touch DNA. All these fascinating geologically and ancestral searches allow you to trace your family tree. Now it also allows the government to do the same. I'm Gary Null, back in a moment with my guest. Please stay with us. Before we go to our guest, we are going to take 40 seconds because we believe we found that woman who lost all that weight, lost over 100 points in her blood sugar, and did a full marathon.
Hi, I'm Michelle, and when I came to Gary's retreat, the reason why I came here was to control my blood sugar. I knew that if my blood sugar remained out of control, that my diabetes would lead to more serious conditions later on in life. When I arrived here last Sunday, my blood sugar was 187. This morning, when I measured it, it was 80. I was expecting my blood sugar to lower some, but not to be completely normal. Gary's protocol is amazing, and I would recommend that anybody buy his book and follow his protocol because it does work.
We just did it abbreviated. She went on to talk about what it was like to go out and where she couldn't walk a block, she walked 26 miles, and now is an athlete and doing great. Let's say hello to Deborah Copeland. Nice to have you with us today, Deborah.
Thanks for having me back, Gary.
Deborah, I want you to begin with some comments about why G5 is so dangerous and why the media is not covering it at all, except to be pro-G5, like the New York Times is pro-G5. And we need the audience to understand this bipartisan bill in Washington to push 5G, and that none of the presidential candidates are talking about it, and how the FCC regulations will force 5G technology onto private property. You'll have no say-so, and smart meters are not connected with G5, and I want to talk about those risks. So take us through this from A to Z.
You're absolutely right, and I hope that your listeners have read your very excellent article that you wrote with Rich Gale on your website, Race Towards Extinction and Climate Change versus 5G. And it's an important article to read. Other articles that are in the press right now include 5G Unreported Health Threat on Medium.com by Deborah Davis, who is on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Dr. Mercola has a piece on his site, The 5G War, Technology versus Humanity. Similar title on Gaia.com, 5G Health Risks, the War Between Technology and Human Beings. And Gabriel Cousins has a piece as well, The Toxic Assault on the Planet, on his website. So people need to read these articles, but in a nutshell, we are beyond precaution at this point. There's plenty of evidence that there is a huge public health problem at power densities, well lower than those that come from 5G. A lot of the issue has to come from the fact that when you're closer to these 5G small cells, because to operate they need to be every few hundred feet on poles, literally outside people's houses. But a lot of what people don't know about 5G is that it also has to work in conjunction with 4G, so that the 4G cell towers are going to be coming in closer to people's homes, businesses, areas that they frequent as well. And, if you go back to the fact that we needed to have cell towers 1,500 feet away to, have lower rates of cancer, not fully protective, but that was sort of the level at which the radiation power density dropped off. We are at intensities well beyond that. For a cell phone to operate in a town, you need minus 85 dBm, your decibel milliwatts. 5G will have a directed beam that can go into your house at 53 decibel milliwatts. It's well over the 10 trillion times levels of background radiation, and it's likely to breach FCC limits in the vicinity, which are up to 1 million times higher than levels that can trigger electrosensitivity in people to tolerate Wi-Fi, cell phones, smart meters, cell towers, and the like. And of course, in 2017, we offshored this bad news. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences had a joint conference at Hebrew University with the Israel Institute for Advanced Studies, where they referenced studies from Los Alamos and Brooks Air Force Base that showed that this radiation breaks DNA, has been used by the military for crowd control, so it affects people's behavior, and it affects human sweat glands and sweat enzymes. And on May 31st, Toronto Women's College Hospital had a conference on this that was hosted by Frank Clegg, former head of Microsoft Canada, who's warning that we need to have a moratorium on 5G, which the Europeans have done as well. They've said it's a violation of the Nuremberg Code. So this really shouldn't be in doubt. And in fact, 4 members of Congress, Senator Blumenthal, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo from California, Tom Suozzi from Long Island, and Peter DeFazio from Oregon wrote to the FCC in recent weeks and months to say, effectively, Houston, we have a health problem with these 5G frequencies. So that background, and you mentioned the New York Times, they are a large source of the problem. They wrote a piece recently claiming that any concerns about 5G are a Russian hoax. A little hard to explain when our own government is saying there's a problem. And as well, you have the Department of Labor and the Access Board, as well as branches of the military, saying that people who are sensitized to microwave radiation need accommodation. The cities of Boston and Philadelphia wrote to the FCC in 2013 saying the same, that you could roll out more of these transmitters and closer, you might have problems with people being able to access things. A recent study in the Journal of Epidemiology said it's now 1 out of 254 people who cannot access the indoor building environment because of even Wi-Fi and cell phones. So, this is a public health problem. And yet, not only does the New York Times claim it's a Russian hoax, but they had an advertorial last Sunday with Verizon where they went on to say, 5G is wonderful, it's going to save you from cancer. It was a very misleading claim because they're talking about using it to transmit data in operating rooms. You can transmit that data via wire just as well, and in fact more robustly and more safely, but they've kind of gotten in everyone's heads that they don't want wires around, but that yet they've created a problem in the hospital. Hospitals in Europe do not use all this radiation. They have wings without it because they know that there's this portion of the population that gets extreme symptoms from it, overt symptoms, and can't get medical care without it. And so City and State Magazine had a conference with Verizon recently where they were promoting 5G. They wouldn't have David Carpenter there. They wouldn't have me there, Deborah Davis, any of the people. David Carpenter's on the presidential cancer panel, and he's at SUNY Albany. They wouldn't have anybody there to speak about the health effects. I called Gail Brewer's office. She's the Manhattan Borough president. I said, you're speaking on this conference, and you need to acknowledge the fact that there is this huge problem. Nothing, no acknowledgement. That was the end of it. So, and if you go back to the New York Times, why is there this problem? It's the same conflicts of interest with all the other topics that you and I care about. If Carlos Slim Halou is the majority shareholder of the New York Times, at last count, $45 billion of his net worth was from wireless and telecom. And sort of the tale of the tape, when I actually tweeted a number of years ago when they were tarring and feathering Nick Bilton, who was a reporter who wrote about the health effects from wireless wearables, they tolerated the tweets, about the science. But when I mentioned that Carlos Slim Halou, majority shareholder, and there's a conflict of interest, the public editor deleted that tweet. That tells you everything you need to know. And in fact, in the late 1980s, with their first electromagnetic radiation crisis, which came from video display terminals, the New York Times was defending a lawsuit against their data entry clerks who were having eye strain, miscarriages, et cetera, from the radiation. And they said, there's no problem. They had a very famous editorial at the time called Suffolk's Screen Scream, sort of pillaring Suffolk County for putting in legislation to protect workers who had to use video display terminals in county government. And shortly after that editorial, IBM was forced to yank these video display terminals off the market and completely redesign them. So the New York Times has no credibility on this issue, and they really effectively jumped the shark by calling it a Russian hoax. And people need to write to them. But more importantly, because I'm not sure the New York Times is going to change the way it does business, is we now have a problem where the Thune and Schatz, Senator Thune and Schatz, have reintroduced the Streamlined Small Cell Deployment Act. You and I talked about it on February 17th, 2017, on your show. We also talked about the privacy and health effects of 5G. And they've now reintroduced that bill. The FCC had passed regulations in the fall of 2018 where they were basically going to sort of promote 5G and make it, easier.
Deborah, we're running out of time. Just quickly tell people what they need to do. Give us a number that they can call to complain about this bill.
They're going to have to call Senator Schumer's office because he's the leader, obviously. And they're going to have to talk to him about yanking the bill because Schatz keeps pushing it as if it's non-constitutional.
What's Senator Schumer's number? He's the top Democrat in the Senate.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a few other people to call. So if you go online, you can find every congressman and senator's phone number. But they're also going to need to speak to Mike Doyle and call for hearings on the congressional side, on the side of the House of Representatives. And they're going to have to speak with leadership over there, Pelosi and Hoyer, and they're going to have to speak to Schatz's office, to Senator Schumer, most importantly, and Dick Durbin, who's the whip. Now, Klobuchar and Warren are in leadership.
But I'm sorry, we're out of time, and our station's going to be cutting away. I'm going to do a whole hour on this Tuesday in the Progressive Commentary. I'll invite you back so we can go into greater depth. But this is timely. We must start calling Senator Schumer,